And good afternoon. My name is Juergen Steinmetz, joining you from livestream.travel and eTurboNews here in Honolulu. And with me, as always, is Dr. Peter Tarlow, from College Station in Texas. I only know Peter for God knows how many years.
At least 12, 13, maybe more, maybe 20.
Well, that's a scary thought. Maybe I have to find some brain.
I think it's closer to 20 years.
Yes, I mean, time flies. You don't.
Yes, it does, when you're having fun.
So how's the weather? That's more important.
Yeah, so the weather is beautiful in Texas. Blue skies, cool mornings, but by the afternoon, it's 78, 80 degrees. Today, you can see people playing in the park, playing basketball in the park without shirts on. Everybody was soaking up the sun. They were sunbathing. So today was a really beautiful day. Low humidity, blue skies, and we're good to go. So I like to think of the spring is the battle between the forces of winter and the forces of summer. And you can start to tell now the forces of summer are starting to win. And so the cold will eventually go away versus what happened in Denver, where all of Colorado basically was under 2 feet of snow and the Denver airport was closed. And of course, that has a lot of impact on the whole transportation system in the United States, because that's an important airport. So I'm glad the snow is in Colorado and not in Texas. But I'm sorry they got 2 feet of snow.
And we were going to go to Michigan a little bit later, and they have a lot of snow there too. So you will hear that.
So you can tell it's still fighting between winter and summer. Winter is counterattacking right now.
And we definitely don't have snow in Hawaii. Actually, we're trying to get more tourists back from Asia. That's
good.
Our second core market after, of course, domestic travel from the US, and has been literally come to a hold for quite some time. Japan came back a little bit, but the implementations for Japanese to come here and then specifically fly back to Japan, having two weeks of quarantine, is very hard. But today is some good news, because Hawaiian Airlines expands the pre-clear program to South Korea as well, and Japan. That means flights now operating again in higher frequency between the two countries, and they can bring tourists, and actually they get cleared already in Japan or in South Korea with their mandatory COVID tests before they get here. So there's going to be no further checks and hurdles or quarantines once they get to Hawaii. So once they get here, they can go to the beach and enjoy their vacation.
I wonder if that will also impact the potential, and I don't think we know for sure, but I believe they're hoping to have some form of Olympics, which were canceled last year, to have the Summer Olympics this year in Japan. I certainly hope so, because working on 3 Olympics in the past and now working on the 2028 Olympics, I know years and years of planning go into it, and I feel terrible for the Japanese if they have to cancel it. But I'm wondering if these flights are going to make it easier for people maybe to go to Korea, and then from Korea to go on to Japan. And I don't know that.
The problem is that Japan is not really opening up.
Yeah.
And, there are reports that Japan really is going to make it very difficult for foreigners to come in, even during the Olympics, because of COVID concerns. So it's a whole different story. We want Japanese to come, but Japanese don't want us to go to Japan. Even.
I see. Yeah. So it's going to be they're going to lose so much money on the Olympics if people can't come. I mean, the whole system is based on getting, tens of thousands of tourists to show up, and Zappo, they're not there. It's going to hurt the hotels and the restaurants and transportation and taxis and everything that's interconnected will just really suffer. Of course, some Olympics is better than no Olympics, but the world needs some positive news, because we've gotten so much negative news. We've spoken about what's going on in Europe. Now, so many countries are now pulling out of the AstraZeneca issue. And I'm not sure if that's because of just emotions or scared, or if there really are real reasons to do it. But that's going to put Europe way back when it comes to tourism, because if they won't be able to get herd immunity, or they won't be able to vaccinate people who want to go in a place in those types of situations, and it'll make hard for Europeans to travel because so many countries now have these some sort of green passport or some sort of a deal where if you show you've had legally both vaccinations, it makes it a little bit easier to travel. So and Europe is still one of the major parts of tourism in the world. Though there's issues going on in places like Mozambique and Tanzania, where they're also struggling with some of these same issues and other issues.
Well, Tanzania, of course, denied there is a COVID problem altogether.
Right.
And from what I understand, the president is fighting for his own life now, having COVID. So this situation, I don't know if it's changed or not in Tanzania, but it has been bizarre because this country really acted like they don't have such a problem. It was wide open for anyone to come and enjoy. And that's definitely also not the right approach. And if you look, Brazil is in a similar situation.
Yes.
And we've talked about Brazil, of course, but it's quite.
The situation is very desperate in Brazil, especially in poor neighborhoods where people are forced to live very closely together. There's no way to have any form of social distancing. And that's a big issue. That's a major issue. Now, it does appear that they're saying they're changing some of the rules of social distancing. Dr. Fauci in the United States said that he thought that 3 feet was more than sufficient for social distancing and you didn't need 6 feet. And that would change things very radically if they change that concept. By the way, no one knew where those 6 feet came from, but after some study, it was done by a German scientist over 100 years ago, dealing with a completely different disease. And he thought it would be good to stay 6 feet away. So the CDC just went with his research from 100 years ago. So if that's actually accurate, or is it something that we just kind of took as an article of faith? We don't know. And Dr. Fauci today said 3 feet is sufficient and not 6 feet for social distancing.
And I'm interesting that you said this, because in Germany, there was no 6 feet rule. It was always a little bit less. And you're probably looking at about 4 feet. It was 1.5 meters.
Yes.
So the rule was different. We came up with the 6 feet, but I think the more the better, so I'm not opposed to 6 feet, to be honest.
Yeah, you can make it 25 feet. Actually, if you sneeze, the germ, the droplet could go up to 25 to 30 feet.
Right.
But usually it appears that the real danger is in the first 3 feet, about 1 meter. But, part of science is there is no such thing. If someone says they have settled science, they don't know science. Science is always about questioning, re-examining, looking at new data, seeing how we want to change it. This is not an article of faith. This is an article of science. And in science, you should always challenge everything and question everything. So I'm glad that Dr. Fauci is at least thinking about this, because 6 feet, and I don't know whatever the right answer is, I support it. But, for schools opening, for people going back to work, the 6 feet was very difficult. And 3 feet would also change the aspects of hotels and airlines, and also waiting online to get on a plane. So, it's big difference, 6 feet and 3 feet, or going through line to have your bags checked as far as security.
Well, as I said, I have no objection to the 6 feet. It's probably safer, but even 6 feet probably wouldn't do the job, as you rightfully say. And
Right.
3, I don't really see. And 3 feet.
And nobody's going to do 25 feet.
No, of course not.
Right. That would really, if you really want safety, you want 25 feet. But 25 feet, everybody would be living in total isolation. You might as well go to jail and be, in an isolated situation.
Yeah. What's interesting is the next trade show for the travel and tourism industry is ongoing, and they're planning full blast. And we, as eTurboNews, are hoping to be part of it if it happens. And this is in Dubai. It's the Arabian travel market. And the Arabian Travel Market has two shows, one a physical one, then also a virtual one after this. But the physical
Yes.
one is something what may happen. However, today there was a little bit of a, I would say, of a surprise when Dubai is now requiring people to get a third shot of the vaccine if they got the Chinese version, because apparently the Chinese version wasn't that effective. I heard in the Seychelles, for example, a lot of the people that have been vaccinated got sick on COVID anyway, and they received the Chinese version of the vaccine.
So, but they'll still accept the American version?
The American version so far has been the best. It hasn't been
Yes.
any.
The data that we have, especially the Israeli data on it, which is they've done the best job of following the data, is incredibly successful. Both Moderna and Pfizer, both are really good. We don't have any data on Johnson & Johnson yet, so it's, I'm hoping it's a one shot versus two shots. But now they're saying that Johnson & Johnson might come up with a second shot to kind of up the productivity. But again, you think about a flu vaccine is at most 50% effective. And if Johnson & Johnson is 75 or 80% effective, that's a lot better than a flu vaccine. So, and the other side of it is it's not only effective in keeping people from not getting it, but should you get it, this severity is much, much less. So it's like having a cold versus then being in an iron lung, a ventilator, dealing with trying to gasp for air to live. So yeah, I think the Americans should be very proud of themselves. Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson are all good. I encourage whatever you can get it. Don't wait, just get it. I'm hoping, Juergen, that you're going to be able to get your vaccine soon.
Well, I hope if the confusion is going to be lifted here, Hawaii, like maybe many other places in the world, you hear one thing on one day and the next year you hear something completely different. So let's see.
So you were telling me about, we have a really interesting guest that's coming up right after this, and dealing with the whole question of airline tickets and travel. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's dealing with the vaccine, and we're going to hear a little bit more about a vaccine passport, how it's feasible and whether it's not feasible, whether it invades your privacy. And so that's going to be an interesting story, and we're about to go to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had never considered the interrelation between having a vaccine passport and maybe the HIPAA laws. And, could somebody cause you problems by either learning about those learning about the fact that you haven't had the vaccine or had the vaccine and how that works? So this should be a really interesting segment, and it's really going to touch on all of our lives. So I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Yeah, so we're going to go there. You will hear a little bit about Thailand for the next 3 minutes before we get to talk about the passport. And
that's because Thailand has great food.
Yes, Thailand, I love Thai food.
So we're going to tie the knot with Thailand, and then we're going to move to the whole issue of vaccines and green passports.
Stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute.
Hello there. We miss you so much. It's been a while. How are you? Thailand has something to tell you. The scenery here is so much more amazing. I look forward to welcoming you back. Waiting for your tight hugs, your pondering moments, your attention, your quality time well spent here in our country. People too await your return. Auntie Thai, the walk master, Nat, the barista, Uncle Pong, the potter. They all miss you. Lastly, we just want to tell you to take good care of yourself, and we look forward to seeing you. With all the love from Thailand.
Move forward with care. Together. Amazing Thailand.
Good afternoon. We're back now, and we're with Bryan del Monte. Not really related to the pineapples we have here in Hawaii, but he's joining us from Minneapolis, and he has, and he'll be talking about the passport, vaccine passport, and specifically where do we stand in regards to traveling and so forth. So I leave it up to Bryan to tell us a little bit about who he is and what he's doing and so forth. So Bryan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. So yeah, just a brief background of who I am. So my name's Bryan del Monte. I'm the president of the Aviation Agency, and we're a full service advertising agency that works with aviation, aerospace, and defense clients around the world. I've been involved in tracking this issue basically since COVID began this time last year. It's really weird, right? We're at a year now of COVID. And I actually got home from my last trip that I would have taken a year ago, would have been today. I was coming back from a convention, an aviation convention of all things, schedulers and dispatchers convention. So it's been a bizarre year, right? So the issue with the vaccine, the issue with the passports, it basically revolves around a question of trust and information. Okay. The countries have a vested interest in ensuring that the individuals coming into their country may not have, a dangerous pathogen. And this is before COVID. I mean, COVID highlights the current case, but it's not like we just let people into each other's countries without having a sense of their health status. With most of the world's travel, we become spoiled because most of the pathogens in the world don't represent a systemic risk to the hospitals and emergency rooms of each other's countries, right? And in most of the world, we have strong inoculations against measles and mumps and rubella and tetanus and diphtheria and all these other diseases. So we don't really think about it, right? If I go to another country, I'm not really that worried that I'm going to encounter those viruses or maladies, and they're not too worried about when people come here. Well, that's all changed now with COVID, right? And we shut down borders, and we shut down basically people going anywhere. The only thing really moving around the world right now are goods. So as we vaccinate, the question that everyone's trying to answer is, how are we going to verify that individuals coming into the country have received a vaccine that is generally perceived by the country allowing the person to come in as being safe and effective? And therefore, that individual probably doesn't represent a strong risk of either, spreading COVID or contracting COVID, right? And so the idea of the vaccine passport is going to be, I'll present you some sort of credential that says, here I am, I've been vaccinated, I'm good. But obviously there's vast differences country to country as to how that's being documented. And so ultimately there are all these challenges just associated in presenting each other credentials. In many ways, it's like the way it was before we kind of like standardized visas and passports, sometime in the 80s, early 90s, because we got tired. I mean, Now you're lucky if they stamp your passport, let alone put in a visa, right? Now that's the triumph of standardizing everything and everybody really getting an understanding as to risks. So we're kind of back to square one on COVID. But ultimately the problem we're trying to solve is making sure that you coming to the United States or me coming to somebody else, to France, isn't going to represent a pathological biohazard risk. That's what we're trying to solve here.
Yeah, it's really to have a vaccine passport is not something new. You
Right.
all remember, or you'll probably remember, and I still have one of those, the yellow put in your passport for yellow fever and malaria and other issues. So this
Yes.
has been around for 100 years. So
Yes.
it's not really new, but we're moving on in technology. Now we have chips on our passports
Right.
that are internationally recognized.
Right.
The vaccine, of course, is very new. We don't know where the vaccine goes, how effective it eventually is. I can tell you, we're just working on a breaking story today, and you can see it later on eTurboNews in regards to Seychelles. Seychelles, very small country, 98,000 people. Everyone got vaccinated. All of a sudden, they have an enormous spike in COVID cases, and they're all from people who are already vaccinated. Now it needs to be seen. Will any of these people be hospitalized? So far, no one is hospitalized. So we don't know where we're going. Then we have the situation in the UK that, with the Chinese vaccine, the United Arab Emirates that used also the Chinese vaccine, among others, now has to give booster shots to everyone who had this vaccine. So having the vaccine may not be 100% security in regards not having the virus or contracting the virus. So we're still learning. And this is probably the same, I would think, with the passport. There have been some countries, like if you go back to the Seychelles or to some of the smaller countries that rely on the travel and tourism industry, they say, okay, we're going to let everyone in, but you have to show us you're vaccinated. Once they said this, some people are coming back into their country, going on vacation, and it turns out their documents are false.
Right.
We had 3 people arrested on the island of Kauai here in Hawaii, not with false passports. Obviously, they're not around or vaccination passports, but with false certificates for having received a test they did never receive. So, and how do you, if you really want to do it, I think there are 2 issues. One, how do you uniformly make this acceptable? This should be something the United Nations, specifically UNWTO, in this case, and the World Health Organization, should get involved in. And I don't know if they are. I'd be surprised if they are. And secondly, what about privacy concerns? Do we now going to have a society of 2 different type of groups of people, one that are allowed to travel and the other ones they cannot travel? How do you see this?
Well, you raise there's a lot to unpack there. So let's take
Right.
take a few of the boxes. Okay. So first, is this an international problem? Yes. Okay. So there are many layers to be involved. And but I feel pretty confident that the existing framework of international institutions is sufficient to address COVID. Okay. We addressed AIDS, we addressed SARS, we addressed smallpox, et cetera. Okay. And as you pointed out with yellow fever and malaria and whatnot, by the way, you still need to carry those cards if you're traveling to certain parts of the world. But we become spoiled. If I go to Britain, passport control in Britain isn't going to be like, show us all your inoculations. Why? Because there's widespread inoculation in the United States and there's widespread inoculation in Britain. So the risk profile, it's like, yeah, we can ask each other's nationals about all that, but is it really necessary? Probably not. Now with COVID, as you pointed out, there's a lot of challenges there. One is that the data, seems to be pretty easy to replicate. Right. I mean, I've seen the inoculation cards. Granted, this is my field. We produce art for a living, but I could make a card in a day. I could make one that would pass, would look just like everything else. So these are not particular, this is not like money where it's hard to counterfeit
Mm.
it, right?
Right.
But that said, the issue is not so much the physical presentment as it is this system to be able to robustly verify. Okay. So, as you've pointed out on our passport cards, we have chips and all this. That's all after 9/11. Okay. And that was all negotiated by the United States, as the world's dominant superpower. Okay. We were like, look, if you want to come to the United States, you got to play by our rules. And so as a result, every country was asked to change how it conducted its passport identification. All right. And so now everybody's passport looks like American passports. Okay. Now, granted, there was negotiation in international institutions, et cetera. But, same thing's going to happen here. Um, there needs to be some discussions about, well, let's say, for example, I get the AstraZeneca vaccine, which now many countries are stopping. But let's say I've been inoculated with that. Is the United States going to accept that vaccine, assuming that at the time an individual attempts to enter, that vaccine continues to be not recognized by the Food and Drug Administration as being safe and effective? That would be an interesting discussion that you probably don't want to have at the airport with the customs office, right?
Right.
So
Right.
you need to know in advance, is it going to be good enough? So all those questions have to get resolved. And I suspect the United States will need to take a leading role. And there's been quite a change in administrations, and this is not a political statement. This is just an observational statement that President Trump took essentially what I would call an autarkic view of international politics. Figure it out yourself. We're going to do whatever we want. And Joe Biden is a neo-institutionalist. So he takes a completely different approach from that. And he's like, nope, we're going to work together. We've got institutions. We're going to use the WHO. We're going to use this. We're going to use that. Okay. So it only works if everybody agrees that when I present my credentials, you understand them, you have a way of knowing they're valid, and you have a way of processing the information I'm giving you. Otherwise, there's no point, right? Everyone can't have their own slip of paper that says, oh, well, here it is, right? Because that's not how this works. So that'll all get figured out. So there's that aspect of it. Now, the other question then becomes the data privacy question. And that is the one that is stickiest both for the United States and for most of the industrialized world, but particularly the United States. And that's because we in this country, with the Constitution, with federal law, and with Supreme Court interpretation of that law, there is a right of privacy, and it is a fundamental right. There is a right of travel, and it is a fundamental right. And so you can't just willy-nilly, do stuff. So Congress is going to have to play a role here to determine how that data is going to be handled, what data can be collected, what individuals need to know. Now we're in such a hurry to get jabs into people's arms that right now we're kind of using our existing system of it's between you and your doctor, and you're getting your little card and all that stuff, right? Well, if we're going to be transmitting this information, it takes me back to my days of when I was with the Pentagon. When I would go to another country as a U.S. government official, I had to get clearances to enter that country. I couldn't just waltz in like when I was Bryan del Monte tourist. Okay, as a government official, I couldn't just walk in. I had to get clearances. They had to know I was coming. They would ask, has he been inoculated? Okay, all those things, right? And when I was traveling as an official of the government, I really didn't need to worry about visas or anything because I was traveling under diplomatic authority. But my point is there was much more of a robust exchange between the United States and that host country when I was coming in. Well, we may see that applied to everyone. And so you may be prompted to produce information that you've been vaccinated when and how. And that data is going to need to be controlled under some set of arrangements that all countries agreed to. I'm less worried about inoculations Because what we're talking about is, okay, Brian got the Pfizer vaccine on March 15th. Okay, great. That doesn't really give you much in the way of like personal identifiable information or privacy issues, right? Or someone. I'm actually more worried about, okay, so what else is on there? Like, when was the last time I was tested? When they take the test, yeah, they can do a COVID test. They can also do all kinds of other tests with a saliva and nasal, swab, right? And I'm not being conspiracy minded in saying that. I'm just saying there is that door that's open there that has to get resolved. In this country, it's going to primarily need to be resolved by Congress. And Outlook isn't exactly the best because they can't even agree amongst themselves to all get vaccinated. Okay, they have a complete supply so that every member of Congress can get vaccinated, and like a third of them refuse to do so, and they refuse to tell anyone whether or not they've been vaccinated. Okay, so it's disheartening, to say the least, that we expect this group is going to figure out what we should do for everyone, right? Now, the Biden administration is like, well, we should look at vaccine passports for people to travel within the United States. Okay. I think that's my suspicion is the primary motivation behind that is actually to incentivize and to a certain extent compel people to get vaccinated because they want to increase the amount of vaccination in the United States. I don't think it's really the case of you're going to have to show a card to get into, I don't know, Missouri at the airport, because there would be, I think, quite realistically and quite legitimately challenges to that under our laws. So, the privacy issue is not inconsequential. It's probably the biggest problem that we're going to have to chew through. And here's the other thing. It's not just raise your hand if you think this is going to be the last pandemic we deal with. We've had 2 pandemics in the last 15 years, right? We had SARS, which freaked everyone out. Part of the reason why we have these vaccines is because of SARS. Okay, and we've had COVID. So something else is inevitably going to come down the pike. So one of the questions for countries is okay, there's the immediate case at hand of COVID, but how are we going to deal with pathogens as a systemic risk in a globalized environment? That's got to get worked out.
Yeah, and it's, of course, it's not only about the United States. I mean, if you look at other countries, look at the European Union. The European Union cannot even figure out how they can control travel within their own extended borders. And you look at Africa. Africa has other challenges besides COVID in like the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the border to Uganda, what again falls into the travel and tourism industry, because Uganda for a lot of parts is dependent on travel and tourism, and then also tourists coming in from other areas. So it really needs an international approach if we wanted this passport. If we didn't want this passport, what is the alternative? Because every country, as you said, has an interest in keeping its citizens safe. If you just look here at our state where I'm at, in Hawaii, we currently have the lowest numbers in the United States, by far the lowest number percentage-wise, because you cannot really compare numbers with numbers, but percentage-wise. And I think a big reason is because we had been restricting arrivals into the state, and we're an island. Of course, we have an advantage. Now, there are many other islands, and some of them are independent countries, like Palau, like the US, like the Seychelles we mentioned, Mauritius, where you can see that COVID is less of an issue. But in other islands, it's an enormous issue, because once it gets in, it's really hard to get out.
Right.
And as you rightfully say, it's all about the capacity also in the healthcare and in hospitals. So maybe there will be a COVID passport, but has different kind of categories depending on the vaccine you get. And I don't know where this all would go to. I mean, obviously you can probably find a chip and implant it into your forehead. That's going to be quite safe. But I'm just joking. Obviously we don't want that, but that might be coming, who knows, And I'm just wondering, how do you think, if you look at the international institutions you said they're there, we have the World Health Organization. In the tourism part, we have the United Nations World Tourism Organization. And when you really look specifically at UNWTO now, we've been following UNWTO for many years, ever since they had a leadership change in 2018. To be honest with you, and everyone who reads us knows my opinion, they're useless. So I don't expect anything from them. So now there's the private sector. Private sector, you have the World Travel and Tourism Council. They're a membership organization. Their members are the largest companies in travel and tourism, like the Marriott and American Express. And they seem to be more effective, also actually talking to governments. Then there is us also with the World Tourism Network, trying to take care of the smaller and medium guys. It's going to be an enormous task to bring all of this together and come up with some kind of a mechanism so actually the travel and tourism industry can relaunch not only safely, but efficiently. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I do. Here's where I suspect where we probably differ. The core of these activities, I would argue, are, as a former policy guy, I would argue these are inherently governmental functions. Okay, who gets to go where, immigration. I mean, we may not think of traveling to a country for tourism as immigration, but it is. Okay, these are all inherently governmental activities. So I find it highly unlikely that non-governmental actors will play a determinative role as a result. Okay. Now, as you pointed out with the European Union, with the Schengen area, that is all intergovernmental. That's also inherently governmental. And they've made their decision on that through international treaty, right? And so, the idea was with the Schengen that they would be transparent within each country of the member states, but they would, essentially control themselves collectively against the rest of the world. Well, under COVID, it's presented a challenge, hasn't it? Okay.
Right.
So I really believe, I'm talking about Hawaii. All right, talking about Hawaii. Governor Cuomo is currently in hot water, but for me, the thing that he did, apparently, I guess he may not be the nicest guy, but the issue for me was when he was like, well, we're going to be checking everyone that enters the state of New York. And if your license plate is from Missouri, well, you have to be quarantined. Okay. Completely a violation of constitutional law.
Right.
Okay. That is, and what Hawaii did, completely a violation of constitutional law. Okay. That's my position. It may be unpopular.
Right.
I understand it worked. Okay. Congress has the sole and plenary power to regulate interstate commerce. And that includes people moving across state borders. And the framers actually had this discussion about who gets to decide what. And it's on Congress. Okay. So any vaccine passports or whatever, they're going to keep people in or out or whatever, that has to go through Congress. There's no way for states to do this on their own. There is no way for political actors that are non-governmental entities. Now, they will most certainly okay, they will. There is a role for them to play. It's not the determinative role. In the end, and what I'm drawing on, as a former political scientist, essentially is this. You have a crisis. World War I, World War II, SARS, COVID. And so the international community attempts to react to that stimulus. And it builds all kinds of institutions and reactions to it. So like the UN, the WHO, the IMF, the World Bank, Bretton Woods, all these things were all response to World War I and II. Well, we're going to have a whole bunch of institutional responses as a result of COVID. Because short of a nuclear exchange, I can't imagine an event that would cause more damage to the global economy than COVID did.
Right.
It's like $25 trillion and counting. Okay, in terms of the amount of damage that was done. So there's going to be an institutional response to this. NGOs will play a role. And this may sound pig-headed on my part. I don't mean it to be. the United States, especially with Biden as president, is likely to take the lead and determinative role as to what that regime looks like for two reasons. One, we're probably the only ones able to pay for it. And two, we're the ones that have the leverage in order to bring this multilateral problem to a solution at the table. And so it's a real, pickle for the new incoming State Department and for the United States that deal with, but it's probably going to be incumbent upon us to ultimately sort this out. Again, and it's not to say that the European Union won't play a role or that our allies won't play a role. They will. And the first set of agreements is probably going to be between the United States and Canada, and then the United States and Mexico and South America, and then the United States and Europe. All three of those things are probably going to get worked out right about at the same time, especially as everyone gets vaccinated, because that's most of the places we want to go. So we want to sort it out, right? So there's a strong incentive. But I just don't believe, A, that a Marriott or a Delta Airlines or whatnot should be the ones that drive the train on this, nor do I think they're in a position to, even if they wanted to. These are inherent governmental activities. There needs to be a policy debate. There needs to be law that gets debated. There needs to be input from the body politic into that process. Otherwise, it won't have legitimacy.
Yeah, and of course, the private sector, there's the lobbying, of course. You lobby the government.
Yeah, they'll influence.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think we both agree on this part. Maybe we disagree on the Hawaii part. And I have to say, and I'm not a big friend of our local government. People know this, but I have to say I have absolutely no objection of being safe. And I feel safe living here because I know we're doing everything we can to keep it out. And the jurisdiction, of course, is an issue. Yes, the federal government has jurisdiction over interstate commerce. What planes can operate or not operate, it's all up to the feds. But the state should have a responsibility who can get into your state. And the city, maybe who can get into your city in a health emergency. And that's really how it was set up here. There was no,
and I get that. I do. Okay. And and I'm not looking to go deep into the weeds on this.
Right.
It is not like this is the first time a pandemic has affected the United States. And it's not like there isn't Supreme Court decisions about what states can and can't do and what cities can or can't do. The challenge with COVID versus other public health crises that we've had is a person could be sick with COVID and look healthy to you and me.
Right.
Whereas in the past, those who are sick demonstrate what are called phenotypical characteristics. You can look at them and go, they ain't looking so hot, right? So it's a lot easier to discriminate against people who are sick versus everyone stay home. Now, curious thing though, as you point out, look, I'm not in favor of this, but I complied with it. That pretty much happened all across the United States. I'd say a lot of the stay-at-home orders, if truly challenged in litigation, that most of them probably wouldn't survive review. And as a matter of fact, those that were severely challenged didn't. Okay. Many of us just took it in stride and we're like, look, this is a really crappy situation, but we all kind of got to do our thing. And so we abided by travel restrictions that probably weren't straight up legal. And we abided by, stay-at-home orders that probably weren't within the power of governors, because none of us, what the prospect of all of us were freaked out about is a simple act of going to the movies could kill you.
Right.
Right. And you didn't know, before it happened, am I going to be fine or am I going to be dead? Right. And even now,
don't know 2 weeks later.
Right. That's right. Right. And so in that circumstance, see, this is why there's going to need to be an institutional response to this, because of that fact. Since you don't know if simple activities could wind up being deadly, this is why people so negatively react to the groups that won't wear masks. Right. This is why everyone's like so binary, hot and cold on this issue, and there's no common ground. So when you look at countries, right, just simple countries like the United States and Canada, okay, quick little historical fact, that is the longest both in terms of time and in terms of distance, unguarded border between two countries in history. We are not allowing each other's citizens to cross at the moment. Okay. First time ever that's been the case. Right. Okay. Why? Because of COVID. Okay. Now, if we're going to get around that, we have to have confidence that the risk profile for each country is more or less identical. So when Canada gets its vaccine rates up, and, you know, let's say Canada's at like 70, 80%, the United States is at 70 or 80%, there's probably not going to be a lot of interest in a vaccine passport for country, you know, for our citizens to go back and forth. So this is something that's probably going to be most heavily used at the beginning to try to keep people safe so that hospitals don't wind up overwhelmed, so that the infrastructure doesn't wind up overwhelmed, so that these, I hadn't heard about the Seychelles thing, but there is a real risk that the variants may reinfect those who have been infected with both, you know, I guess, organic COVID and the vaccines. So, you know, there's a lot we don't know. But the idea is they're trying just desperately to open things up, right? But then there's this information asymmetry problem. How do I know that you coming into my country won't kill people? That's the question effectively we're trying to solve.
Yeah, and you have like two huge powers. One is the economic hardship people go through. And I can, again, living in Hawaii, where we depend on travel and tourism, except for the military business. For the most part, I mean, there are heartbreaking stories of people who've stayed in business. These people who run this restaurant for 3 generations, they're out of business. Right. Shopping malls are deserted. During the hard times, you can go through Waikiki, Kalakaua Avenue. You can pretty much sleep on the middle of the main road and won't get hit by a car. So the situation is not easy for people. That's right. And to keep calm and to really find a solution, I think everyone in this country, even though with two polarized opinions, sometimes are doing a fairly good job in not panicking. And we need to probably keep the cool also when it comes to developing a mechanism, what definitely could be this international travel passport in a way. And yes, I agree with you, the United States would probably take a leading role, maybe together with the EU on this to see where this goes. But it has been a fascinating discussion, I have to say, and we would love to continue this. And as I said before we went on the air, if you wanted to join the World Tourism Network, I would encourage you. Maybe this could be a whole discussion for network members to have. And we cover both the private sector and a lot of the public sector around the world. And I'm sure everyone is interested in your expert opinion here. And maybe if we all put our head together, maybe we can come up with good suggestions that are adopted by the powers to be to solve this issue.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and it was a fascinating discussion. I hope it's of value to viewers.
No, I think everyone is enjoying this because we're all looking forward to travel again. I can say I'm getting my vaccine shot hopefully on Wednesday, and I already have my flights booked to attend the World Travel and Tourism Council conference in Cancun the end of the month, and after this in Dubai, the Arabian travel market. So we're going to, at World Tourism Network, we're partnering with both. We're really looking forward in meeting people. Hopefully everyone is vaccinated who gets there. But we need to somehow restart this business, but in a safe way. It makes absolutely no sense in just starting in travel because of the travel's sake without knowing what the consequences are. But
absolutely.
And that's why I think everyone agrees the vaccine is a major step forward, and hopefully we can keep it like this.
I think so too. Well, good luck in your travels and good luck with the vaccine.
Yes, and build a snowman.
Yes.
Yes, I know
it definitely is snowing pretty good here right now. Yeah, it's unusual. Everyone thinks of Minneapolis always is snowing, but it actually is today, looking out my window.
Well, maybe I'll go surfing after this to see what happens.
I'd rather be in Hawaii than here. So have a great afternoon.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.